All right, so I think we can go ahead and start, and I'm going to invite the panelists to join in as well on video. And of course, a few more people will probably join in, but we can start the conversation around the topic today, which is social media and healthcare. And so what is that? What does that marriage look like? How to best move forward in this very kind of crazy environment at the moment? And I think we have a lot of insights, so I want to get there. But before we get there, let's introduce ourselves, and maybe starting with our guest speaker today. So Kimberly, over to you.
Hello, I'm Kimberly Irwin. I am located in Denver, Colorado. I'm the social media and digital marketing strategist at UC Health, which is a Colorado-based health system with almost 600 locations across the Denver metro. And thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on board, Kimberly. And myself, I'm Mantis. I head up the content marketing team at Social Bakers, and over to Monica from our product marketing team.
Hey there, it's great to be here. My name is Monica. So excited to be joined by Kimberly. I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation because I believe it's really front of mind, right, for everyone right now. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation, and get active in the chat too. We want to hear what you're thinking. What are your questions? What are your vibes right now? I'm sure we'll be able to get into them as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Monica. This is a two-way conversation. Really, we want this event to be as valuable to you as we can. And I think the crowd is just the right size where we can do a little bit of kind of chatting. So if you have some questions you want to be answered throughout the webinar and anywhere, if you have additional kind of info that you need, just drop your question in the chat and we'll answer it right away. But just don't forget to change that you are responding to all panelists and attendees so that we are all participating in this conversation. Now, let's dive into the topic. Monica, do you want to walk us through what we'll speak about today?
Yes, happy to. Of course, we're here to talk about healthcare on social, and that's why we have such a great guest with us today. First thing we wanted to talk about is actually all about content. I've switched the agenda here. So first thing we want to talk about is all about content, how to create content that really resonates with everything else that's going on, right? This is a big one. Second one is managing a community in 2021. So how to build that sense of community, but also know that you're getting so many questions coming in, so many comments, a lot of flurry of activity going on. And how can you manage that to make sure that everybody feels heard and validated? And then the last one, I think, is an interesting one because maybe it's a little bit newer in the healthcare space. It's bringing influencers into the mix, right? How can these outside voices actually boost your brand visibility and even help you educate audiences? So I think it's going to be a pretty cool agenda today.
Yeah, thanks for walking us through it. I think it's really maybe our goal here is to give you a sense of the different ways that you can approach social media as a healthcare brand. And I think these areas really are sort of the core pillars of that conversation. But maybe on the topic of what do you use social media for in the healthcare space? So we want to ask you, what is your brand using social media for? Is it kind of to raise awareness about the brand, or maybe raise awareness about the products? Or are you actually using it to kind of sell products directly to the consumer through social media? Or C, how about employer branding? It's a big one, I think, for the healthcare industry. And now D, is it all of it? Because social media has so many use cases and it's possible to do it all if you have the capacity for it. Or E, we don't know. Sometimes I feel that way myself, honestly. But maybe Kimberly, can we ask you, how do you approach it in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a bit of A, a bit of C, maybe a bit of B. So I would go for all of the above for us at UC Health. I think that our biggest thing is just really building awareness through our employer branding. UC Health really focuses on the patient journey. So a lot of healthcare systems, that's kind of what sets us apart. A lot of healthcare systems, they'll really look at the doctors or what they can offer, and those will be kind of the center of everything, but we really focus on the patient, and then later bring in how can we help that patient, what kind of care can we give, what can we offer as far as services. So that's kind of the selling part, we want to drive leads, AKA make somebody a patient, because we can offer them the best care that we can. But we really just try to show that through each step of what the patient goes through. So that's kind of our brand.
Right. Well, that's interesting too. If you think about like your patient first journey, and we're, growing into this world of customer experience, you really want to make sure that you are there and tracking with what they need and what information that they're looking for, rather than, just shining a light on what you can do, but then tailoring that light to the different patients' journeys that they're going through and the information that they're seeking. I think that's super cool.
Yeah. So we're going to cover most of these areas. So we'll touch on them in this webinar. And we also have people responding that it's, Jill is saying that it's an A and C. So yeah, I think for many of us, it's going to be a mix. We kind of have to we have many objectives in our social media teams, and that's actually sometimes makes our jobs very challenging when you have to do all of them successfully. Monica, do you want to walk us through the statistic here?
Yeah, I think it's always good to really understand and pair our own experiences and what we're doing with what's happening in the market. What are people seeing? And it's true that the consumers are demanding these modern experiences from healthcare. So what does it mean by modern experience? But it's they want the same experience from the healthcare provider that they really get from other businesses. So because you're living in this ecosystem, healthcare is part of everything that you're doing in your life. You have certain standards, and the standards, I think, are being raised across all industries, healthcare included. I don't know, Kimberly, what are you seeing, and would you agree with this?
Yeah, I would think so. Especially having some insight in community management. I just think that people are really trusting what they hear on social media. They can hear from the patient. They can hear about other people's experiences. So I think this definitely rings true in our area, in our business.
Yeah, and of course, there's another kind of perspective to this. If you kind of look at what experiences are consumers demanding, well, they are a lot more demanding on your team by day, essentially. And actually, especially if you look at the context of what happened in 2020, when everything moved very much to digital, the customer experience on your digital channels has become a top priority for many social media teams or digital teams, essentially. This stat actually illustrates very well what the difference in this regard. If you look at kind of the 2019 total interactions for the top biopharma brands that we looked at versus the 2020, I mean it's nearly a double. So, and that is a big difference for any team.
That's quite a growth pattern. Maybe that's something that you were planning for in the long term or growing strategies towards, but it was stark doubling, and then you have to deal with what that is, and now you have to grow from that double. It's like it's quite a job to be in healthcare, to understand, if we can keep this momentum, or was this definitely driven by 2020.
Mm-hmm. And Kimberly, are people turning more to you in terms of are you seeing the same reflected in your data?
Yeah, so over the past year, we've seen huge growth when it comes to engagement. People are really coming to us as thought leaders. They're coming to us with questions. Again, it kind of goes back to looking to social media for answers and resources. And yeah, we've seen a huge amount of engagement, mostly questions and, seeking answers about COVID things, vaccines, just different things around the pandemic mostly, but it's been huge growth.
Mm-hmm. And Monica, you touched on something really important, is that if you take this engagement, okay, so there's so much more attention in us. How do we take that to 2021? What happens then? What do you speak about to an audience that just engaged with you in such scale? How do you remain relevant to all of them?
Mm-hmm.
There's just more stats, I think, to illustrate of for these key brands of just how much engagement we're talking about. Sometimes per single post, we're talking, the numbers are small here, but it's like 150,000 interactions for one post. That is a lot. Monica, something else to highlight here?
I think it's interesting to understand, your different strategies and your different platforms as well. I think Kimberly and I will get into this a little bit later about, what's your strategy for Twitter versus Facebook versus Instagram, and what are your audiences expecting from you on those different platforms? Because I'm sure they're expecting a little bit of a different approach. And when you're, scaling and having this huge amount of growth, you also have to think about, the nuances in your strategy. Can you really do it all?
Yeah, good point. So the first section, and I'm really excited about this section because as a content marketer, this is for me, my pretty much day to day. So I'm really curious to hear, Kimberly, how you maybe approach it a little bit. And we have a dog guest as well. So just part of the webinar.
Sorry about that.
Awesome.
Monica, maybe you can kick us off here.
Yeah, when we spoke with Kimberly earlier, we were really talking about this customer centricity, the patient really being at the center of your strategies, right? So if we look at 2021, I'd be curious to hear a little bit about the themes that you've been exploring to really make sure you are highlighting the patient. You've talked a little bit about that already. What are some different content formats that you find really working? And how do you highlight the great users or the great people or the great patients and families in your community? Are you able to shine light on their content? So I'd just love to hear from you about what are you thinking about in these areas as you strategize, day in and day out.
Definitely. So when it comes to themes, again, since we're so patient-centric, we've really been, I'm so sorry about the dog.
No problem.
We've really been trying to highlight their journey. And, this past year, unfortunately, a lot of that has been with COVID. So we've just been trying to be kind of an expert in that area. And, oh my gosh, these dogs. Can you just hold 1 second?
No problem at all. Yeah, we'll keep the audience entertained.
I think we will.
Oh my gosh, sorry. I think they were having a moment. They did that just because I'm on here.
They miss you.
Does anyone else have dogs in the audience? Help me out. Okay, so yeah, with themes, so we've really just been focusing on the patient journey. A lot of our most engaging posts were around celebrating the patients that were able to make it out of the hospital. We had a video that kind of showed like our journey through COVID. We usually don't shine the spotlight on our employees as much just because we are focused on the patient. But this year it really, our audience kind of changed and our engagement changed. And it was really about creating this culture and like community within the hospital. So while we normally don't, we did want to highlight our healthcare workers. There are frontline staff that are, bending over backwards to make sure that everyone's safe. And I don't know, it was just such a big thing this year, I'm sure, for everyone, just really showing that appreciation for those people putting their life on the line. So we just made sure to create like a culture and community online, just really making sure we were there for our frontline workers. So kind of highlighting our staff this year. Formats, we did that in, we try to do a lot of video, but it's hard to do video when you can't be in the hospital. So our normal engagement usually is us, traveling through the hospital, working with volunteers, getting photos of volunteer dogs, things like that, like everyday content that usually comes. And this year it was not that. We couldn't be on the ground because we couldn't be in the hospital. So it was really getting the patient story through the nursing staff or through different people that worked at the hospital. So it was just all different this year. So we just kind of rode that wave, but still patient focused, but then also focused on our workers. And then user-generated content is always hard with healthcare just because I'm sure, as all of you know, well, I don't know what the rules are outside of the US, but with HIPAA laws, we can't really share patient information online unless, we've gone through that with the patient. So if somebody is posting something, it's hard for us to repost or use their content without going through a lot of hoops and making sure they're okay with sharing that. Because once you acknowledge that someone's a patient, that's sharing patient information right off the bat. So user-generated content can be tricky, but it just takes a lot of planning ahead of time. It's hard to do something spontaneously, but if you plan, and we really try to, go through our comments. That's part of our community management. See if people are like, oh, we love your hospital. I had a hip surgery there. We have different things set up so that we can get those patient stories offline and talk with people about if they want to share that or not. So we do get user generated content. We kind of look for it and then plan ahead with that.
Very cool. We
Yeah.
have a comment as well here that how to really still tell patient stories. Mallory mentions that she's used avatars or personas to tell patient stories too. This gets around exposing patients to the public. Oh, it's an interesting approach too. Very cool. So yeah, I'll go for it, Mantis.
Monica, go ahead.
All right, then. I did pull a few posts from UC Health just to really show the kind of stories that you are highlighting, as you mentioned, these frontline workers as well. And if we look at the data here, very high positive sentiment, A-graded content. So I think what's important now is, highlighting the emotional aspect is really getting the engagement too. So even though you do post a lot of informational content, I think it's really well embedded into your, patient first emotional strategy too. And you have a unique place to play that role on social media, I think.
Yeah, and just a bit of housekeeping, if I may jump in. So just a reminder for people to change when they're responding in the chat to all panelists and attendees. But aside from that, let's dive back into the conversation. And something that about emotional stories that's really important is how it connects to sentiment as well. Like it's kind of difficult to get really positive engagement actually in social media. Social media is sometimes a rough environment, but if you get at people through kind of emotion and through a lot of positive emotion, you can really boost kind of the positive sentiment overall for your page. And patient stories seem to be really doing that from what I'm seeing.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a little harder to be negative when we highlight a patient and their journey, just because, it does tug on the heartstrings, and you're just a jerk if you comment negatively on stuff like that, right? But to your point, we actually just finished a campaign called the Kindness Campaign, just trying to change the tone on social media, because this year we really have seen so many negative comments come in, or just negativity all around, more so than usual, which obviously is going to increase because our engagement is increasing. We're seeing more people comment, but that was a big initiative for us. We did like a thank you campaign during the pandemic where we scraped thank you notes that people could leave on our comments for all of our healthcare workers. And then we had them printed out and taped all along the walls within our hospital so that people could come to work and read, how thankful their community is for them. And then our kindness campaign was just, you could send kindness postcards to people or get yard signs that just had quotes about kindness. So we were really trying to change that tone online too. So that was a lot of fun.
That's cool. And it seems like also you're, bridging that digital world that we're all living on and trying to make it a little bit physical and bring it back to the people there. Very nice.
So I noticed that the posts here are on Facebook, but I wonder, and maybe this is just a wider question as well. Curious to know what the audience think about the difference between Facebook and Instagram for healthcare brands. But Kimberly, how do you approach it? Is there a big difference between these two channels for you?
I mean, definitely. So Facebook has always been our main channel, our top performing channel. We can push out content there and really be more informative. I think Instagram is this untapped resource, and we really try to focus on implementing Instagram more in, just pushing out content more there this year. But we actually almost doubled in followers probably in the last year and a half from shifting our focus there. But again, we focus on the patient, but we really saw that a lot of our engagement on Instagram was coming from our employees. So we kind of took a different turn on Instagram and really we don't cater all of our content to employees, but we know that they're there, and we've done polls, just to see what the audience is like. I love that Instagram allows like different things like that, so we can really see what people are engaging with on there. But we saw a lot of employees, and so we try to do fun things on there that we know are gonna, again, nurture that culture that we have at UC Health, and kind of speak to those people. But it's still good for the public, but it's kind of inclusive of that audience on Instagram. So I know Instagram isn't huge for healthcare right now, but I do think like if you can use it in the right way, it's definitely an opportunity.
Very cool. I like also how you mentioned that, you're not on social media just to produce content and connect, but you're actually getting feedback and information from these polls that you're doing. I think that is definitely an untapped resource where people can really share how they're feeling, and then you can really adjust based on exact direct feedback, and it's always very useful.
Yeah, it's also helped us in our talking points and Q&As when it comes to the vaccine. We have done a couple polls on Instagram as well. Just what are you hearing? Like, what are your biggest fears about getting the vaccine? And we use that information to try and educate people on with those responses. So, here are the reasons why it's safe. Here are the reasons why you might consider not getting it, but this is the other side of it. So we've really been using that to our advantage this year.
That's awesome. So we mentioned that communities are really center for, especially Kimberly, the way that you use social media. So I think it's really worth spending more time in this section. And maybe, Monica, do you want to start us off with this part?
Yeah. So as we think about social media, and Kimberly mentioned this as well, is people are getting their information and their health information from social media. So we have two stats here. 41% of people say social media would affect their choice of a specific doctor, hospital, or medical facility. And 24% of patients even look at health-related images of other patients. And so it's really about, and this data is telling us that social media is an informational hub, even beyond a marketing hub. And we'd love to understand and talk to Kimberly about, social media and community management, I think, here in this next section.
Yeah, so this is my main role. So I think I can probably offer a little more information in this area. So
Perfect.
hit me with the questions.
Cool. Mantis, do you want to take this one on?
Yeah. Let me just kind of walk us through what maybe questions you should be you're able to answer for your patients. Sorry, I got distracted. I was looking at the next slide, but let me rewind back. So being there for the patients, answering every question. So how do you actually make that a process? How do you actually start and successfully execute it from start to finish? And in your team, I think that there's a lot of practical advice that we could give to the audience. So like, where do you begin? Like, what channels do you do that? Which teams manage it? Is it just the community team? Are there other teams? Where do you source this content? And then how do you actually move it into your social media channels? How does it become content that people engage with? So I don't know, Kimberly, can you walk us through these steps?
Yeah, so this past year, we really started to focus on online reputation management, which kind of feeds into our community management. I actually originally came on with UC Health as an online rep management person. So I was really managing all the reviews that came in on Facebook, Yelp, and Google, as well as BBB. So we set up a process for, I guess, categorizing every response that comes in, and some are escalated, so it goes to like our patient representative team. Some are just given contacts to reach out to. So we have like a 3-tiered system there, and then again, community management with the amount of engagement, that position has really grown, and so that's kind of where I switched over. So I do oversee community management on social, and I oversee online reputation management. But we do have, it's kind of one team, but we're all there's just different positions. So we have that. We also have our PR team that lets us know if they're hearing anything on social media, hearing anything in the media. That allows us to sometimes go out to news channel posts and scrape through those comments. Sometimes you just you can't answer those, and it's hard to be in that space just because people get so heated, I guess. I don't know. It's like a heated discussion always on these political news posts, but we just try to be there. We try to really answer every single question that comes in. So that's our biggest goal. So our team tries to always come up with a response. And if we don't know one, we try to provide a resource. So I think just that in itself is good, just because patients know they can come to us, they can ask the question, and they're going to get an answer. We do our best to just really support that. So that kind of covers the teams that work on that. And then our process around using that information, again, we just use any feedback we can get to better ourselves. So if that's bettering our talking points for when people have questions around this, we have like a resource where we have everything documented, spreadsheets where every question comes in. And then if we need to like get an approved answer from our leadership or PR, they'll give us an approved answer, and then we'll have that in a spreadsheet. So it's a quick reference the next time. But really just being the content experts or the experts in this field. So when people do have questions, we build that relationship and they begin to trust us, and they can rely on us for an answer. So that's our strategy.
I think it's amazing. Oh, go for it, Mantis.
No, I just wanted to say that it's a really like a nice, clear process that I think anyone in the audience can implement in their healthcare brand. So thanks for explaining it. But Monica, I think you were going to ask another question.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is that you do emphasize answering every question. So you do have to bring in all of these stakeholders, like you mentioned, PR or your leadership teams to answer them. I'm curious about how you can keep that cadence or keep that timeliness to make sure that you are getting the right answers at the right time, but of course also making sure people feel like they're not waiting around. How do you really manage that with such an influx of comments? Superheroes.
Yes. I mean, it can be hard, especially I think we have almost 600 locations when it comes to Google reviews and locations across Colorado. So it can get tough. Thankfully, we don't have that many Facebook pages, but it's up there. But we have a ton of stuff coming in at all times. Luckily, we have a team that is all about teamwork. So it's really about creating that culture within your company too, I think. We have two doctors, Dr. Zane and Dr. Barron. One's kind of I think he's our chief medical officer. And then the other one is our expert in infectious disease. So they've been really key players in the harder questions that are more medical. So we always can go to them, and they pretty much always try to turn something around in about 24 hours, but it's usually sooner than that. We're all busy. We all have a lot of stuff on our plates this year, but just really, I think our leadership this year has taken social more seriously than any other year, because they've seen like the growth and engagement, how much potential is there to just like build ourselves up as a resource to the public. That's what they're looking for. And so you just really have to set yourself up for success with your team. And so I think just having those doctors on hand, having leadership that understands the importance, and making sure everybody's a team player so that you can all kind of come up with the answers together. And again, that resource of having a document where you can refer back to questions that were already asked, and just staying organized is key, just because a lot of people like ask the same questions, they just ask it in a different way.
Right. Yeah, it can be tough to really make sure that you feel like you're answering a person's questions and their exact intent, but then you're spotting these patterns over time, which I think can then improve how you respond to them over time as well. Very interesting stuff. What I also thought was very cool that you mentioned was that you do have that leadership buy-in, which I think, if you didn't have that in 2020, then I'm sure certainly the healthcare, specialists on this call as well, or hopefully they're getting that leadership buy-in to be able to turn social media into this, community building activity, this central hub of information. And so I'm curious to see what 2021 and 2022 will look like. It's going to be transformative, I think, for the healthcare space.
Yeah, and I think the buy-in really comes from the data. And Kimberly, like you said, once the management team really sees the data, then it's much easier to get the buy-in. And so I also urge the audience, if you need to kind of build that data story and you need assistance in building that, connect to our teams after this webinar, anyone really, or on our social channels, and we will help you put together that data story that you can present to management.
And just to chime in, something that we're really exploring data-wise has been in Social Bakers is the competitor analysis. We actually just expanded that to include a couple more local competitors, but that's been a game changer just even in the last couple weeks. Just being able to see what's performing for other healthcare systems, what questions are coming into them, and how can we relate to the questions that are coming in for them. So it's really nice to kind of, be one with other healthcare systems, someone you used to think of as your competitor. I know locally we've all really come together as health systems to help each other out throughout this pandemic. So it's really nice to have that community and be able to see what their patients are asking as well. So it kind of unifies all of us, but then it helps us to better answer questions and better our strategy.
I think that's a great point to understand that, competitive or industry benchmarking is really about, not watching others not do well, but really taking best practices and learning them to make the entire industry useful and informative on social media for these shared audiences that you have. So I'm glad that that's a perspective that you're sharing. It's very cool.
Yeah, we push each other further.
You do.
Next point that I want to bring up that's maybe often a dilemma for many brands, not just in the healthcare space, is whether you need to approach it kind of your profiles from a global versus kind of a local point of view. And I think community really plays a huge part in this question. Is there any way is there a particular direction where we want to take this discussion? Monica, turning to you here.
Yeah, I think it's just important as you guys grow as thought leaders in this space. Is there going to be, that split where you do want to start splitting out that content from your local information, sharing up-to-date insights on, vaccine availability and things like that? I just wanted to highlight the struggle and understanding that, when you're building out these pages, what are your audiences? What are you trying to reach? What are these topics that you're addressing? So if you do have, a global page, that could be for, more thought leadership content around healthcare or healthcare data or things like that. But then maybe that local page is a great way to, connect with local audiences and the pains that they're dealing with at that moment. Kimberly, I'm not sure if you also want to share and chime in here. I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think this can be different for everyone. I think it's really dependent upon your goal with your social. I know UC Health wants to be a thought leader, and everyone kind of in that space thrives to be like a Mayo Clinic. There's goals there, but I think it just really depends on, who are you talking to? What's your focus on content? Is it being a thought leader? Is it just connecting with your community? Is it trying to connect with patients? I think we do all of it, but it's just like, what's your priority? So I think that kind of plays a part into who you're following. But I think that it's always good to, look at what everyone's doing just to see where you can better yourself. And I think there's something to learn, whether it's international or local. I think there's something to learn from everyone.
Absolutely.
Now, the next section is something that there's certain industries that pretty much rely on this strategy, but we want to look at this industry, the influencer industry, from a point of view of healthcare and what can be really kind of unlocked there, because there's a lot of opportunity and there's a couple of really cool kind of success stories or use cases we want to share with you. And I'm sure Kimberly will be able to add more value here as well. So we're going to jump in here. So Monica, again, to start off for this section.
Happy to share the stats, Vantes. So of course, as we know, social media and social media influencers for many different industries, it's all about, developing that trusted insight, having that trusted review, that more unbiased review than a brand may give you. And we see this as well in the healthcare stats as well. 42% of customers are using social media platforms view health-related consumer reviews. Kimberly brought this up already. Reviews management, reputation management is certainly huge on social media, and then of course on the review platforms like Yelp as well. And so how can influencers sway these or give their own consumer reviews if you really trust them? So it's a whole other additional area to consider now when you think about reviews beyond someone in your community, close by your local community. Now there could be someone in your influencer list that you're following that you could start trusting and listening to. So I think the first area we wanted to talk about, I find utterly fascinating, is the rise of these health professionals on social media as thought leaders. So you have registered dietitians coming onto the scene. You have doctors as well providing insights, and people really engaging with this content. And maybe people who might feel nervous about talking to a doctor, maybe they feel closer to be talking to these people on social media before they develop or go have longer term relationships. So I think this is an interesting one. Mantis, are you following any health professionals on social media?
I am actually. Not for maybe yet health advice, luckily. But there's one influencer, and they're both on Facebook, I think, and Instagram, and I forget the exact name. But they look at kind of all the movies about medicine and the kind of with the medical theme, and they analyze like Dr. House, for instance, is one of them, and look at the episodes and just try to describe them from a real kind of medical point of view. And it's always fascinating and very entertaining. And so that's my consumption of influencers in the space.
Anyone in the chat as well? Are you guys following any healthcare professionals? Be curious to hear. I think that registered dietitians, I think, is a huge one that shot up. Because they realize, this is where they can grow their voice and grow their community and grow even their clients if they don't have to, they can consult with them, not face to face anymore. That it grows the client base for sure. Mallory says she infectious disease expert. Very cool. What about you, Kimberly? Are you following any health professionals on social media?
Yes, I think I'm following this Dr. Joshua. I think he's like the anti-celery juice guy, but I think that there's been a huge increase in people following medical experts. Again, like you said, nutritionists, with TikTok and Instagram having all of these fitness influencers. I think people are really trying to focus more on their health. I think, the infectious disease experts is one that I've seen. I know when some of the stuff was coming out about what would work against COVID, you just didn't know what to read or what to believe. And there was so much information out there. But I think that was definitely a time when hearing from a doctor and like their experience and, hearing from a medical expert on the background of whatever medicine they were talking about, I think that was just really beneficial. And that was probably a time when those people were growing. Nurses, again, with the whole thank you to our healthcare heroes, I think a lot of people are following people from that. So I think it's definitely changed with healthcare and having influencers in that space. It wasn't something I saw before. So.
Right.
Yeah.
We have some chatter in the chat here as well. Natalie is following surgeon experts in telemedicine. And then MDs who are voicing about vaccines, taking a standpoint, which is something you mentioned, Kimberly. And Mallory makes an interesting point too. If you're managing healthcare social media programs, it's then following HCPs is an incredible source for trending topics, misinformation tactics, and engaging content. Fascinating to follow. Yeah, I think that trending topic is also a very interesting point to understand. If you're following healthcare professionals or fitness influencers on TikTok, what's the balance there? Whose information is going to be the most well heard in the space?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Monica. You
no, go for it.
I just want to, I think Kimberly, you brought a really good point that during kind of the 2020, there was so much noise in the media about what's happening around COVID, and myself included. I really turned to digital channels to really find out more granularly what's actually happening, and On YouTube, personally, I started following the MedCram channel, which is like, it dives so granularly into the science of what's happening, and it's just something you would never find on regular media. So I thought that it was really a pivotal point. Like I think for many people who are outside of the healthcare space.
Definitely.
And I think in our next couple slides, we have some other interesting, what's that blurred line if you're not following an expert, but your beloved influencers start promoting, healthcare topics or, awareness around public health and things like that. So I think that's interesting too, to see what's the, I guess, trustworthiness of influencers that you trust and love already, now bringing in healthcare information or being that point of contact for people who maybe aren't as engaged with the healthcare space, and maybe they're new, or maybe they're shy, or maybe they feel uncomfortable in the health space, and maybe this is making public health information a little bit more accessible. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I guess that's the open question.
Yeah, this campaign is really, really impressive.
Yes, I would say that, public health information, as long as it's, in collaboration with, trusted sources, trusted experts, is going to be, really important for influencers if they want to maintain their credibility. Kimberly, when we were talking before, you mentioned that influencer strategies or bringing influencers to events is something that's interesting to explore, but can be a bit difficult, bringing an influencer strategy into the healthcare space. Would you share that with us a little bit?
Yeah, so I think that's really the main place we've used influencers in the past. So we've had like some fitness events, or we do a big women's health event each year. And so we've had some influencer speakers just talking about health. We've had medical experts. So really using influencers in that way has been beneficial for us, just because it can be hard to get influencers, as a patient, because again, all of the HIPAA laws, it's hard to follow somebody through their patient journey and still, I can't even talk, still be within those laws. But I think that's been the most successful thing with us, is just having people that we know engage with our community, and just having the micro influencer that already knows people around. It's really helped drive our event sales. So we've definitely had some success with that. Yeah.
That's very interesting. What do we else? I think we have one more example, and this is even moving from, not just about promoting health information, but even starting to promote, health products. And this is, I think, going to be a blurred line as well, but if you are a, healthcare brand providing health products, how can you use influencers to boost that visibility? So this is an interesting one about at-home UTI tests, for example, and it's really about bringing these younger influencers, personal stories, and maybe even breaking the stigma and opening that conversation that can be more difficult to open maybe in a healthcare setting. But if you're hearing it from, your pal, your influencer, in a comfortable space, maybe then you can feel comfortable sharing that story, or having that, I don't know the words now to describe what you're feeling or describe what's going on. I think that can be very powerful if used right. And here we can see this Instagram live video, not live video, Instagram TV got 71,000 views. So 71,000 people are now opening up and engaging in topics that may seem a little uncomfortable to talk about outside of your own home.
Yeah. And there's something that influencers really do quite successfully that maybe brands don't, and especially when it's, again, awkward areas like this, but also something when you're like a brand that maybe doesn't have a well-oiled content machine, and it's difficult for you to create really like snappy, engaging content. It's easy to get in that space for influencers with your brand, right?
Yeah, we have some great comments in the chat here. So Wakas, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, asking, are we compromising on competency of an individual when we measure influencer by follower numbers? Just a thought. Yeah, I think it's so important to look at really every aspect before you bring an influencer on board. That's, engagement. understanding their different types of audiences, what other products they've been promoting over time, doing the background check on other vendors in the space they've worked with. You really have to do your supreme vetting, not just go with a larger macro influencer. But as Kimberly even said, working with micro influencers in the community might have a much larger impact than bringing someone on board that may seem like the right fit just because they have a large reach.
Yeah, a little tidbit about me. I'm actually a micro influencer in my community. I'm
Yeah.
a big foodie, so I do a lot of restaurant visits and stuff. So I've kind of been on both ends of the influencer spectrum. But I think the biggest thing I think with sourcing influencers is gathering all the information and knowing what information you need. I wouldn't ever just look at just follow numbers. If you don't have a software that can look at the back end of who their audience is, geographical breakdown and who they are, men, women, age range. You can always ask for that information, but I think making sure you look at the back end of an influencer is so important just because you can see, what's real engagement and what's not, because there's a lot of fake stuff out there. So to that person's point in the chat, I think that's super important, not just follows, but vetting the right influencers and making sure they feel right when you watch their content. I think if there are people on here that are doing, a healthcare campaign for a product, this is huge. And I think it's only going to grow in the next year, just because I've seen that myself. Taboo topics being okay to talk about because it's like a friend of yours that you don't know is online talking about how it actually affects them, and like the things people don't normally talk about are the things you can't read on the back of the bottle.
Absolutely. And in the chat as well, Zahra basically echoes our opinions here about having the right influencers on board so the message reaches the right potential audience. Yeah, absolutely. And you can only find that right influencer if you have done your thorough vetting, and always know as a brand you are resting your reputation on that influencer as well. So you really have to be sure before you make that call. And then, of course, measure the success at the end of that, right? You want to understand that the partnership is actually growing awareness or selling the products, depending on what you guys have agreed on. So
Yeah.
very, very interesting stuff.
Okay. So we want to also, so maybe there's one more question coming in related to this.
Yeah. So Josh is asking sourcing information from the chat. So they're talking to each other. So Mallory, can you further explain who HCPs are? Or if Kimberly as well?
But just a reminder for people in the chat to change when you're sending out a message to all panelists and entities. So when you're asking a question, then you can the others will be able to see it in the chat. Sorry. Go on.
This makes me laugh a little bit because isn't healthcare funny how we have so many acronyms? It's like, how can you? But that's what I was going to guess. Healthcare professionals. So
yeah. Thanks for us who are not in this space. That's very helpful. Yeah. So everything that we've sort of covered today, we wanted to include in one hub of takeaway information. So the content side of things, community management, and influencer strategies. But we have the time a little bit to walk through these and take these to your teams or take them away while you're thinking about your next steps to see if 2021 and 2022 will see the same sort of engagement as 2020 did. The first one is knowing your whys. So we talked a lot about this. Why are you on social media? Are you educating and sharing accurate information, building brand awareness, listening for relevant conversations? I think, Kimberly, you brought up this perfectly, is, your competitors are not just your competitors, but they're a source of best practices and information that you can really learn from, steer your strategy, and understand your shared audiences together. Or engaging in employee branding. Mandus, do you want to just run through the last couple of ones about the content takeaways? I don't want to be the only one.
Yeah, so one of them that we discussed, if you're in this place where you have the dilemma whether you should move global or local, which I'm sure some of you are, then really think about the goals that you're trying to achieve. So that kind of thought leadership vibe on the global pages versus the more community vibe for the local pages. As well, very important, I think Kimberly mentioned a number of times, the kind of the approval process. If you kind of have to share content, that's the information is accuracy is just key in the healthcare industry. So do you have that set up? Do you know what the guidelines are? Is there an approval system in place where you can quickly just click a button and something's approved through someone's phone, let's say through the doctor's phone? And as well, grow your impact with your audiences. And that's a bit of a, as well, there's testing involved in it, try to test different approaches, see if something kind of works a little bit better than the previous post, and try to expand that area, whether it's thought leadership or the patient stories, as we heard in Kimberly's case. This is the exciting section. Maybe Monica, do you want to begin here?
Yeah, Kimberly really broke this down for us because this is so important. Is when you're doing community management, it can be lovey-dovey and you want people to feel satisfied and happy and trusted part of the community, but it's really about a lot of processes and procedures. So defining the process to route the right inquiries to the right teams. Kimberly, will you remind us a little bit of some of the teams that you're routing information to over time?
Yep. So we have an online reputation representative that kind of goes through all of the reviews that come in and answers them. But then we have our 3-tiered system. So if we have reviews that come in that are mentioning things on a certain list like suicide, legal, just kind of the big red flags, those are going to go to different leadership. We have escalation contacts, and then we have kind of a middle range. So that's going to go to our patient representatives team, where they can open a case with the state. Then we have smaller things, customer service type things. We'll try to reach out ourselves or reach out to somebody from the clinic. We have PR that lets us know if they're hearing anything in the community and on any media sources, so we can go try to answer any questions there. And then the social team just has a community management person, which is me. So just trying to oversee all the comments that come in on social and just really respond to everything that comes in.
Wow, it's an absolute ecosystem for sure.
I forgot the leaders who provide us answers, and just our leadership who really supports us in getting the answers that we don't know.
Mm-hmm. That's perfect.
Yeah.
I think we covered all of those, so
Yeah.
good work us. And the last one is the closest. And actually, we already have questions in the chat about influencer strategy. So maybe we can open those up before we go through these takeaways. So what could be the best strategy to scout an influencer for a new nutraceutical supplement brand? What profile suits it the best? So Mantis, maybe you can talk about this in terms of just how to find the right influencer and match it to, maybe a new product that has no brand awareness.
Yeah, and there was an important piece of information added to that given that the brand has no brand awareness, so assume no audiences don't know you yet. So one place to start would be to think if you were to have your own audience, like if you were to have it on your own channels, who would you like that audience to be? Because that's essentially who you have to find on the influencer side. It has to be the right audience that you would want to have access to, because essentially what you're doing with an influencer, if you're paying them or collaborating with them, you are paying for that access to their audience. So it has to be the exact match for your business. And maybe you've done persona research already in your business and you can kind of identify that. So when you go into that search process of looking influencer, have that kind of persona with you. Now, of course, to find the right influencers, you can actually use the Social Bakers platform. You're able to look for influencers on Instagram who have business profiles, and also on YouTube as well, which is a huge channel as well in this field. So this is my kind of short answer to this.
Yeah, a lot of research and a lot of vetting, but I think if you're honed in on what areas to look for, what keywords to look for, what interests will really vibe between your influencers and your audiences, you could be making a good start in building out that short list to vet further. So if we look at our influencer strategy takeaways, I think Mandis, you covered this all quite well, but important to uplift important causes using user-generated content, get information into the public through authentic personal stories. So whether it's, from a medical professional, from an influencer you trust for these more difficult conversations, or some people will call them embarrassing conversations. But as you're doing that, maintain compliance, make sure you're getting the right approvals, and always understand that interplay between your audiences and your purpose. And that's why you want to be engaging with influencers, not just because it's cool or hip to do, but is it really going to make an impact on your business and the goals that you have, for sure.
Yeah, those are great points. And it's especially if you the audience kind of asked a question here. If you're a new brand, influencers could be a really good channel to have instant access to an audience that's relevant to your business.
Yeah. Kimberly, are there any takeaways from here that you'd like to share in general on influencer strategies, or basically on the whole sort of litany of tasks that you are managing every day?
Yeah, I mean, I think you already mentioned most of what I would have said. Just really making sure that you come up with good personas of the audiences that you're looking for. Make sure that when you do vet the influencers, you're asking them the right questions about their audience and finding out, really everything behind what's just seen on the front end of their profile. And then just making sure it feels right and it's not presented as a fake thing. You're trying to make people comfortable in talking about whatever you're offering. So I think you guys pretty much nailed it.
Nice.
Well,
Some group effort here on this webinar today.
Yeah.
I really appreciate all the conversation, and even in the chat as well. We have one in the Q&A about someone who wants a replay of the webinar. Yes, the recording and also the deck will be shared out. So these takeaways that we walked through, you'll be able to revisit with your teams at a later date while you're actually in the zone and strategizing as well. But if you have any other questions, we'd be happy to answer them in the couple minutes we have left.
Yeah, and of course, if a question doesn't kind of come to mind right now, you can really reach out to us, whatever channel you choose, either in the email you receive later with the recording, or just go directly to our social channels, or feel free to find us on LinkedIn and connect with us there. We'd be happy to help.
You'll find us somewhere, and then we'll be happy to chat for sure, especially such a hot topic. We're learning so much. And Kimberly, thank you so much for sharing your insights too. You are in the thick of it. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights and helping us out here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me and my dogs. Say goodbye too. So it was nice chatting with you guys, and I hope that everyone got something from this.
Perfect.
Yeah, so good luck, everyone. Thanks for joining, and as well, thanks to the panel. Okay, do we have more questions? Do we answer them? Do we have time?
We're having some thank yous here. One question maybe we can answer in the last time is, how helpful is paid content if organic reach isn't doing much? It's a whole other webinar, but
Yes,
Mantis, you want to take that?
Important question and a big discussion. It is helpful, but know that with your paid content, you have to have especially clear objectives, because you're essentially paying money to get this paid reach for people. And usually when you pay for stuff, then management really needs to see why you're doing this. But of course, then if you have an objective to, let's say, brand awareness, introduce your healthcare brand to more people, that's a pretty clear objective. If you need to sell a health product, a clear objective. So of course, it's really important in that regard. So if you know what your objective is, it has to be a part of your strategy for sure.
I think it also, just to chime in, I think it also really helps you narrow down your audience. So if you have a niche audience, paid is kind of a pay-to-play must-do. So I think if you're not getting the people that you need to, then paid is always a good route.
Perfect.
Yeah, perfect.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate it. And Kimberly, again, thank you. Huge thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone.